Hey everyone, Totem God here, coming at you with another build guide video. This time it's going to be for Forbidden Rite Hierophant totems on patch 3.15 Expedition League. So, like normal, the format's going to be me talking a bit about the build, why we're doing it. Then I'm going to hop right into a map and give you guys some footage of the build in action. And then we're going to hop back out and I'll talk about it more. And again, just the idea about that is so that if you just want to see the build in action, you want to look at the PoB, go do it yourself, you're a more experienced or advanced player, you can do that. And if you want to hear more about my methodology, why I did certain things for the build, stuff like that, you can sit tight and watch the rest of the video. We are going to be doing a Forge of the Phoenix map this time, and the reason why we're doing a Guardian map is because the single target damage I feel is so high on this skill that showing it off on a boss in a normal tier 16 probably wouldn't really do it justice. So I was going to do something like a Conqueror. I wasn't really going to do Sirius because, you know, there's no map version to that. So I was going to do something like a Conqueror, but I was like, Conqueror, you know, the map is essentially white before that, so I just, you know, I alked this. Nothing insane, but kind of decent. And we'll take a stroll through this and kill the boss. But first, why Forbidden Rite totems, right? So when Forbidden Rite was released, I was debating between whether I want to do a self-cast or totems, because it seemed like a really strong skill. The amount of chaos damage it would give for percentage of your life, like I think it's 12%. Just seemed insanely strong, and ultimately I decided on totems because with totems there's just that kind of added layer of safety, and although I do think you could get to comparable levels of safety, potentially even more safety as self-cast, to be honest, like tankiness, the one thing I was thinking is like it's going to be harder to accomplish that earlier in the league, and I wanted a super smooth league start, so I was like totems just seemed to be like the perfect way to play this early on. Because no matter how much the damage income we really see into the totems is, they're disposable, right? And it actually ended up exceeding my expectations because I think I could have swapped over in hindsight a lot quicker than I did. I was leveling with Arc Totem, and Arc Totem is fantastic, especially with Hierophant. So there's no complaints there really, but I think I could have swapped so much earlier because even with no cluster jewels, I've seen people do this build. And the cluster jewels, the reason why I reference them is because those are what's providing the plus chaos resistance to the totem. So they're theoretically kind of important, but even with the 0 of them, you know, just with the totems, I think base 20% chaos res and the 45% damage reduction that they get innately, these totems, they do so much damage is really the thing that they don't, it's not necessary that they survive for a long time, especially on something like a Hierophant where, you know, you have a lot of excess mana to place down new totems, your placement speed's super great, right? You don't really need them to last a long time, to be perfectly honest. Like, some situations it's more advantageous than others, but yeah. So, basically, the build has been exactly what I hoped for. It was an excellent league starter. It was better, in my opinion, than starting self-cast. And the one thing I was really debating off the gate was, like, out of the gate is, do I do Dark Pact or do I do Forbidden Rite totems? Because Dark Pact honestly seems on paper like it might be more damage. And I've done Dark Pact before, and it's great damage. And especially with all the nerfs that have been coming in, Dark Pact seems to have been avoiding more of them than not. And because of that, I think Dark Pact is probably one of the strongest totems outside of Forbidden Rite. Now, the thing that makes Forbidden Rite insane is that the AoE overlaps do seem to add up a little bit. We weren't really sure if that was going to be a thing prior, so now that that's basically confirmed, I think it's much better. But before that, you know, Dark Pact seemed like it was really strong, but the problem with Dark Pact is for it to really feel good in a mapping situation, you want Astral Projector. We weren't going to have access to that super early on, so I wanted to do something where we're going to have just a super easy time getting the build off the ground, and that's exactly what this is. So we'll pop the Phoenix map in right now and get through this thing. The playstyle for this build is, I would say, optimally, you're going to play it a bit more defensively than something like a Freezing Pulse build. You're probably not going to want to play it quite as offensively. Obviously, you can build it tankier. I'm going to be making multiple videos of how to build this in different ways, but for right now, I just wanted to kind of get something out here because it is a very powerful build. This is the version of the build I started with on League Start, so I haven't really invested very much into this. I have a Viridi's Veil, I have a 6-link Soul Mantle, but right now we're not using them because the point of this is not really to flex the damage, but more to show that, hey, even with nothing, or not nothing, but like, you know, even with very minimal investment compared to other things, this build does great single target damage. I think it definitely, it doesn't struggle mapping, but it's a weaker mapping skill than something like Freezing Pulse. Especially for like kind of like mid to lower high tier content. I feel like once things get a lot of damage resistance and you get into really high maps, this can seem better than Freezing Pulse if you're actually having trouble clearing some packs. So like, let's say you have a budget Freezing Pulse build versus a budget Dark pack. You're gonna feel the Dark pack clear really begin to kick in at that point. But prior to that, Freezing Pulse tends to just feel better because it comes out faster. There's not really a delay. You're getting all the freezing, right? I'm going to go back and do this because we don't want to forget to do it. Kind of annoying. What is spawning these? With the circles? I forget, honestly. We're not trying to really get like an optimal spread here, but just to show you guys. So again, you know, this is pretty typical. You just put your totems down. You do a lot of damage here. You can cast some Wither if you want. You don't really need to if you feel like you're unsafe. You can stay pretty far away for the most part.
My mana is spent.
Those mobs hurt. Okay. I think that's pretty much that. I'll open this stuff later. It's not really... That was there. Okay. I was like, allies cannot die. Yeah, this build I tend to like to play it a bit more defensively. I'll put the totems out there, then kind of like dart back. If you want more defenses on the build, you can also use something like Shield Charge for sure. It'll make it a bit tankier than this. Now, right now, we're going to get into the links more later, but we're using Greater Volley for clear, which does fantastic for clear with this skill. For bossing, we're going to swap to Hypothermia, as for me at least, given my current AoE threshold, I haven't noticed being able, like, it doesn't seem like we can get all of the volley shots to hit on single target. And we do have chill effect from the skitterbots, so that's allowing us to effectively make use of Hypothermia. There may be certain AoE thresholds with the skill where using Greater Volley is the single target option. Certainly if you PoB it and you put Greater Volley in, that's the go-to gem, assuming all the projectiles hit, but I was having problems getting that to happen. We do still hit with multiple projectiles, though. We do overlap. So we're just building up some charges here, building up some curses, rather. And then I'm going to pop this before we go in, because... Actually, I don't even think we swapped it in, did we? Put some Wither down on this guy. And we kill him very quickly, as you can see. That was with non-optimal Wither time, obviously. I don't even think we had good Despair time there. We were kind of just playing it super safe. You know, the boss does have increased attack, movement speed, and Aegis Fire, so just figured play it a bit safer. But you can do that with this build, still kill a boss in an incredibly quick fashion. So we're gonna... Oh, I did have Hypo in there. Okay, yeah. So we're gonna hop out of the map. Keep in mind that's not a 5-link, no Viridi's Veil, no low life belt, any of that stuff. I'll go over the gear, but nothing really here is that insane. And there is some specific notes that I would recommend about gearing. I'm going to do some timestamps for this, so if you don't want to listen to me blab on about the entire methodology, I would recommend that you maybe listen to the gearing aspect of it, because I think a lot of people are gearing this build wrong from what I'm seeing. Could just be, you know, what they have available, but yeah, so I'll let you guys in on my thoughts about that. So first thing I guess we'll start with is Ascendancy. To me, Hierophant's the no-brainer. It's super easy to level as. I would do this in any like solo SF situation. Hierophant's just unequivocally the best. It's going to be more of a pain to level up as any other Ascendancy. But especially like a league start scenario, budget, Hierophant, just you can't go wrong with Hierophant. It's so good. The main reason for that being that with the other classes, a lot of them are more giving you elemental damage bonuses, and we're not really scaling too much elemental damage here. We're not really scaling any in this build because we use Void Manip, but you can do versions of it where you do scale elemental, but not going to be your primary thing. Something you could also consider if you wanted is Elementalist, and you basically take the Shocking Conflux with the 2 Golem nodes and the shield. But ultimately, I just decided it was going to be, you know, not quite as good after the Elementalist nerfs. So, but yeah, that is something you want if you want that big, thick shield. And then you don't really have to use the Golem here, the Skitterbots. So you could use something else. However, I will say the good thing about the Skitterbots is they do provide the chill, which you're not really going to get elsewhere in a lot of cases. So that lets you use Hypothermia. And it lets you have a nice swap for greater volley support in situations where, you know, you're not going to have enough AoE to make all these impacts hit, so this isn't going to be your primary single target support. Yeah, so I would just stick with Hierophant. It would be my recommendation, but I will probably be putting out some more videos showing some variations as well. Now, coming right out of the gate, you'll notice the tree looks a little weird. That's because you have to remember, we're not really scaling elemental damage with this build, right? So we're not scaling physical damage, so these nodes are largely useless. We get the 14% damage mana node here, and then we save some points by going up here. And we get these. If you're really short on resistance, you could grab this, but again, just not super efficient anymore, right? So basically we come through here, grab Mind Over Matter because we're going Hierophant. Otherwise, it's a pretty standard totem build. Not much that you're going to look at and be like, oh, you know, what is this? But I do want to explain some things. So this node right here, Corruption, you definitely want to get this, in my opinion. Whether you want to anoint it, whether you want to get it, I normally recommend just getting it because you're probably going to be up here if you're trying to use clusters to begin with. This is insane, 20% increase effect of Withered. Withered, if you could see, as soon as I started withering the boss, he plummeted, because Withered is like insanely good for this build. So yeah, really, really strong right there. Very good node. Definitely recommend getting that. I like to get these totem clusters over here just because there's like a ton of life, damage, and duration. I like going down here to begin with because you get Unwavering Stance. I'm a huge fan of Unwavering Stance. I've said it in my previous videos. I think at this point in the game's I've been playing totems since pretty much beta. I mean, it's not like I don't play other stuff, but I play a lot of totems. And I wasn't always a stun immunity necessity guy, but the game has just become so dangerous and so toxic and so bad, I feel like, over the years with, you know, the mob damage and stuff like that. It's so easy to get stunned, even when you're playing safe, even when you're playing the relatively defensive build. And, like, Brian King's Soul, it doesn't necessarily help you in this. It's great for leveling through the story where you don't have much life to begin with, so you're getting, like, even the little hits can stun you and you don't want to be chain stunned, but it's not really that great in endgame mapping scenarios where, you know, getting stunned for that one time is going to lead to your death. It's just not good. So I really like picking up, you know, stun immunity in some way, and Unwavering Stance tends to just be the easiest way to go about it. sacking a little damage, but I feel like it makes it super worthwhile. So yeah, I always pick that up. Now the cluster jewel situation here is a bit interesting. So I opt to go with 2 separate clusters, like coming out of the tree in 2 separate places. Now one thing you can do is you can get a chaos large, put it in here, and then branch it off into 2 mediums, right? That's another thing you do. It costs more points though, and again, this is kind of like initially a low investment character. Initially I only had 1 of these clusters, so which I will show you right here. This one is a Sleepless Sentries with Ancestral Preservation. So Ancestral Preservation is like the main thing a lot of people talk about this build, because it gives 30% totem life, insane, totem physical damage reduction, never hurts, and 40 chaos res, which is basically like one of these is going to be fine. If you have like, you don't even need to have Sleepless Sentries. It's obviously just kind of like gravy. Your move speed's always going to be good, especially with like a totem build where your kind of like defensive mechanic is moving around, not having to stand still and cast. So being able to move faster is always better. So don't get me wrong, this is really good, but you don't need it. I would say try and get 1 of these Ancestral Preservations. Will probably make the build feel just a bit cleaner than if you had none. But you don't have to pair it with anything. It could be just a single off node, essentially, in a jewel socket. It'll work just fine. The next one I have down here is Ancestral Reach with Ancestral Preservation. I kind of like sniped this one. Again, not necessary at all, but this is a pretty good setup if you can run 2 of these, because keep in mind the damage just from the totem life is not bad at all, because it's scaling your base damage, your base chaos damage. So yeah, that's what I'm doing for clusters. And otherwise, we're just kind of getting the usual. We're getting mana. Oh, make sure you go. We're going to have plenty of placement speed, so don't fret about skipping the placement speed node for the totem life node when you're going up into here. I see some people make that mistake because Hierophant just has so much placement speed. Yeah, pretty much. This is pretty much the build. Ascendency. This is what I wanted to talk about. So initially I was going Sanctuary of Thought, and Sanctuary of Thought is strong, but I feel like the main benefit of running Sanctuary of Thought would be if you can get AoE overlaps, right? And what I found is when I spec'd out of Sanctuary of Thought to try out Conviction of Power, you're not really... I didn't find my damage going down at all. Essentially, if anything, it actually increased due to the power charges, it felt like. So, yeah, I personally don't really think you should go Sanctuary of Thought unless you're aware of the AoE overlap threshold for the skill, which I'm not sure anyone is right now. It's something we're going to have to do more testing on. The moment this becomes essential to essentially like getting more AoE overlaps with something like Greater Volley on a single target, I'm all about it. But until then, and when you're first starting out, you're probably not going to be in a scenario where you can do that. So until then, yeah, just I would ignore this. I'm probably going to do a build where my goal is going to be to get as much AoE possible, and we're going to see like what we can do with this. But right now, for this kind of like the starting budget guide, we're not going to worry about it too much. Another good thing about Conviction of Power is having power charges can be nice if you want to use that Timeless Jewel that gives you the 4% more damage per power charge, or it's 3% or something like that. That's a super strong jewel when you have 4 power charges all the time. This node really is quite unfortunate. It was so much better before, because before you could spec into frenzy charges and have like 5 frenzy charges up at all time. Now you're kind of like down a frenzy charge, but I guess you literally have them all the time, which is okay. But it's a really good defensive option, because you'll find this build is kind of like lacking in defense because there's a delay with the projectiles launching. Which you can increase with faster projectiles, but there's not a ton of sources of projectile speed that are readily available with this. If you have GG gear, you can get something like double projectile speed on both wands, or on one wand if you're using a shield in the wand. My BIS weapon for this would definitely would be a wand because it can get projectile speed. But yeah, until you get something like that, you're not really going to be able to mitigate the kind of like delay aspect of it too much, and it's going to continue to be an issue. So having any type of defense is good, which is also why I run the Chaos Golem here. So you basically have 20% fizz reduction on top of Mind Over Matter and stuff like that. So yeah, that's the idea with going Conviction of Power. It's pretty much the tree. Obviously, we're using a Self-Flagnation. I don't think we don't use a Spire of Stone, just because there's not really a good place to put it, in my opinion, where the points justify saving anything. If you go into PoB and you put it in some of the places I was thinking of putting it, it's not worth just taking other damage nodes. And it's not really worth the stun immunity or the life it gives on the totem itself, because the totems are already incredibly tanky, especially when you're running 2 clusters. And they don't get stunned really anyways because they have so much health, right? So just something to note there. So we'll get into the gear next, and I'm going to save the wands for last because I want to talk about how to scale damage with this. The gloves here, just, resistance, mana, energy shield, that was the goal here. Getting chaos res on a build like this, very helpful, because we don't run that much life, and in this version we don't have a ton of free mana for MOM, right? So anything you can get kind of helps. Running 2 Kikizarus. Now these are the ones that are qualityed for the increased effect of curses on you. As I said in my Freezing Pulse video, you don't really need to do this because you can just spec into this soul right here, which I don't have unlocked right now, but 20% reduced effect of curses on you. Pairs perfectly with the 2 rings. That's a very easy budget option for getting into maps using the dual Kikizaru setup. To be honest, if you're on softcore, using double Kikizaru and just having the 20% curse effect remaining is not the end of the world when you're first getting into maps. You don't need to completely shore up your curse effectiveness, but if you really do want to do that before you get into maps, you can take Sanctum of Thought. It's not a terrible node, because the reason why I say this is you're probably not going to have access to this Pantheon immediately, right? Because it requires you kill a map boss. So taking this right out of the gate is not terrible. Reduced damage from crits never hurts either. Something to note there. Okay, so for Amulet, this is where you can get kind of spicy, because you don't really need placement speed, so you don't have to worry about having a slot to craft placement speed on because you have so much with Hierophant. And you don't need a ton of stats with this build. If you're running Hypothermia, you need more than you would otherwise, but if you're not consistently going to be using Hypothermia, or you only use it for bosses, you don't necessarily need like a max level one anyway. So normally you'd be super struggling on a lot of totem builds to get especially because like the primary one is Freezing Pulse. That's really good right now, right? Or it was prior to this patch. So you'd want like Dexterity because a lot of the cold gems require Dex. You don't need Dex as much with this build, which means you're kind of free to use a Talisman, which is really nice because there's some really amazing talismans. So what we did is we just doubled up on the multi. We got a little bit of spell damage, some cast speed. It has a decent amount of life on it and resist. I think this is really only like 20 or 30 chaos. And, it seems like it would be a lot more, but it's corrupted, right? And it's primarily a damage-focused amulet with no stats. A lot of people do need stats. We don't need stats, so my thought was take advantage of it. We use the new Blighted Oil or whatever to get the corruption we want on it, and we corrupt Ironwood, which in my opinion is one of the best early game corruptions. It's probably one of the best all-around corruptions because I tested it between Ironwood and the Frenzy Charge node, the minimum Frenzy Charge, Discipline of the Slaughter. This one's much more expensive to corrupt and it does less damage, I believe, from my PoB calculations anyway. So yeah, don't underestimate the totem life, and that's just a really solid node overall. makes your totems even tankier, so you can't go wrong with that, right? It's definitely, you don't want to underestimate the fact of when you can make your totems tanky for free. In this case, I say for free because that node also gives a ton of damage. Take the opportunity because they can be squishy, and that's one of the real highlights with this build, is that the totems are not as squishy as you're going to be used to with a Freezing Pulse build, anything like that, right? Freezing Pulse build, a lot of times you're relying on the totems freezing and heavily chilling the mobs, because otherwise, if the mobs just surrounded the totems, they would destroy them, you know? You rely on the high damage, the freeze, the chill. In this situation, though, these totems can legitimately tank some mobs. They tank hits pretty damn good, and it makes them really strong against especially bosses like things like Hydra and like the Phoenix you just saw, because they're going to get more shots in. And if the boss is attacking them, you're getting really good damage uptime as long as the totems are staying alive, and they have a much better shot staying alive with this build than they will with any other. That actually reminds me, before we move into the rest of the gear, one other cluster you can do is the projectile cluster, the projectile medium cluster jewel, because there's a notable on it, I forget the name, but you can look it up pretty easily, where it basically gives your projectiles taunt. So it allows your totems to taunt things, which is highly effective with for bossing with a build like this, because you're getting tons of hits, so the taunt should be up relatively often. The totems can actually tank the mob, which is good, and you want the mob to really be on top of the totems in most cases. So that's a super good cluster to get for the build as well. It might actually be more optimal to use one of these clusters and one of the projectile taunt clusters, to be honest. You can also get it paired with projectile speed, which helps the problem of the projectiles being a bit too slow, you know, like them coming out slow. So definitely something to consider there. Again, this is a leak start build I haven't really invested a ton in aside from the clusters. So, you know, that's why we haven't really gone to that extent to min-max it. But I want to give you guys this information. The helmet, I actually got this helmet from ROG, to be honest, and then got a barrage enchant on it, which apparently nowadays isn't so good because they hate barrage. So, but just high resistance, high life helmet. The I believe the enchant you can get for Forbidden Rite is like an extra projectile. That's insane. So you definitely should get that. There's no reason to not have it. Again, this is just not a high investment scenario here, which just shows you can get a lot out of this build without a ton of investment. So yeah, definitely get that helmet, but completely not necessary. We already went over the amulet. These boots, in my opinion, they're no-brainer. The totem life, you want to get them with high totem life. The placement speed never hurts. The damage they reflect, not insane, but still good. Like, everything about these is usable. The only thing that sucks is they don't have life, but, I mean, hey, you're getting kind of like insane boots in every other area, so this is a situation where you're fine taking that hit. The best enchant is, obviously, critical strike chance if you haven't crit recently, for sure. The belt, you know, unless you're using the low life belt, this is just belt with a lot of resistances, will do you perfect. Stygian could potentially probably be better for sure, but again, this is a low investment version of the build, so we just have a leather belt. And what I really want to get into is the weapons. So I think people scale this skill incorrectly for the most part, because they were just thinking, oh, chaos skill, let's get flat chaos damage. You know, there's like a shaper mod for that on wands, I think. Let's get plus level to gems. You know, that's really good. That was good on Dark Pact, right? Why wouldn't it be good on this? And it's not that those things are bad. Like, they're going to increase your damage, right? But one of the things you have to remember in any type of game where you're crunching numbers and doing stats is there's like a symbiotic relationship between all the stats that are kind of coming into play, right? So you have like crit, cast speed, damages in terms of just increased and more, and they're all affecting your skill in different ways, and flat damages, base damages. Now, the thing about adding flat chaos damage and adding gem level is it's essentially, in this case, like adding totem life, because it's just adding base damage to the skill, which is then going to get scaled by all the skill's other stats. Now, the problem in this case, specifically with adding those stats, is typically the reason why they're so effective is that those stats are highly limited. They're basically, you don't get a lot of flat added damage to spells on weapons in general, and you don't get, you have a fixed value of whatever the game maker wants from the gem. And this is why, for some skills especially, gem levels can be so potent, because you're kind of exceeding what the developer has intended you to get for flat damage, right? And this is why Battle Mage can be so potent in a lot of cases, like with the Freeze Balls build, because again, we're exceeding the amount of flat damage that the skill should have, which means that when you then scale it, it gets a lot stronger, right? This skill, though, has kind of like the opposite problem, or not really a problem at all, but it has the opposite situation where you're getting a ton of base damage. Like the raw flat added chaos you're getting just from having Totem Life on your build is insane with this skill, right? So adding more base damage on top of that just really isn't going to give you as much effect. It's kind of like when you have totems. If you have low amounts of damage investment in the tree, adding another totem to your build isn't going to provide a ton more damage. Adding another totem to your build is going to add a ton more damage when you have really high damage per totem already, right? So that's why usually there's always kind of like a bit of a balancing act there, where it's like, do we want to... You don't want to completely neglect on your overall damage to just get more totems. In the case with totems, it's not as much analogous, because a lot of cases you get just extra totems for free or for very minimal cost. I think the one main trade-off is with the dual wands versus wand and shield. That's a clear trade-off, but in a lot of cases you're going to just end up with a minimum of like 5 or 6 totems, depending on what ascendancy you play. So yeah, you really want to be looking for things like flat critical strike, or critical strike global multiplier, flat damage as in spell damage or chaos damage, like percentage wise, cast speed, and critical strike. Now you'll see there is flat chaos on this, but it comes with the cast speed roll. So obviously, if something is going to come with the roll as just a bit extra, it's not bad at all. The incursion mod Takati here is super good for this build actually because of that. It basically gives like T1 cast speed, and it's giving you chaos damage added to spells, which is just insane. So look up some of those when you can, but it's hard to find a super good one. So this is a thing I crafted, and I'm going to tell you how to craft the weapons in a second too. But we're not really using the flat added lightning here because we have void manipulation in, and I tried using a different support to see if it'd be worth having the effect of the flat added lightning in. It wasn't for my particular case. Your mileage might vary, but yeah, so we rolled this ourselves, and this is just a really strong weapon in terms of raw stats, and there's no flat added chaos, no plus gem to levels here, right? Now, again, I don't want to steer you away too much from plus to gem levels or, flat added chaos, in the sense of if you find those mods on a weapon with other good mods, it's still a good weapon. The existence of, +1 to level of gems or flat added chaos of spells, it's still going to give you damage, it's still going to be good. It's just, I'm saying it's not as good as other stats. You don't want to sacrifice other stats with the intention of getting those particular stats. So how did we roll the weapons, right? Something I love to do is to take advantage of the fact that I think we actually bought this weapon, to be honest, but this is the one we rolled. And I was like, okay, I want to make a good weapon for this build, where we decided we're not going to go crazy into scaling the flat chaos aspect of it. So what I'll do is I'll get a weapon that has a high fractured crit multi-roll, right? Because that's a super good stat that we want to scale. And then I will pair that with some type of essence. Now, I think the best one unequivocally is probably the cast speed essence. You'll see this has 27% cast speed. That's because we used like the tier 1 cast speed essence on this. At the time, they were really expensive. I wouldn't recommend you do that, especially on a budget build, but I already had one. I didn't like straight up buy a ton of them. and this is what I actually rolled when I got it, so we kind of got lucky there. But using like the mediocre cast speed essences, even like, let's see, I think I have one of each here. Yeah, so this is the one we used, I believe, but the deafening one. But you can use like shriekings or screamings, and those are really good. Or you could use woe. Woe is also really good. Or you could kind of do the inverse, right, where you get the cast speed as the fractured mod, or the spell damage. I think usually getting the spell damage is probably the worst way to go. You wouldn't want to do that unless, you know, like you were super budget constrained and that was the only thing you can find. But even if that was the case, you're still going to be fine. You just want one of those 3 stats: crit multi, spell damage, or cast speed, basically, as the fractured stat. If you could find a fractured hybrid spell damage mod, I think that would actually be insane. But in terms of making like a GG end weapon, but I hadn't been able to find that when I looked, so I don't know if there just wasn't any up or if that mod doesn't exist. But that's what you want to be doing. You want to get one of those 3 fractured on the item, and then just spam essences until you hit something good. And you're kind of like the arbiter there. You know, how much do I want to spend? How much chaos can I afford to spend? So that's the methodology behind rolling the weapons, in my opinion. And yeah, so finally we will talk about the Soul Mantle. I want to talk about corrupting it. I want to talk about the gem links. So I use Void Manipulation because in this particular setup, it's unequivocally better. I think that's going to be the case for most people. If for some reason you're getting a lot of elemental damage from some other source, there might be like a justification for not using it, but I think it's going to be pretty safe to say you're going to want to use it most of the time. Forbidden Rite, obviously. Increased critical strikes, this just simmed the most, and especially since we're not really inflicting an ailment with chaos, or inflicting withered, but that's kind of different, right? It doesn't scale based off the damage we do with the actual skill itself, so there's no reason not to have like the pure highest DPS. So that's why we have the increased critical strikes over crit multi, because it just gives more damage. Greater volley, like I said, best possible thing for AoE. In my case, because I have hypothermia, or because I have the skitter bots, I can use hypothermia, which is really nice, because if you don't have skitter bots, one of the issues you kind of run into is like, I think you're kind of stuck with this. I guess you could put slower proj in, maybe. I haven't really tried that, so I don't know like how good it would be. But yeah, if your projectiles aren't overlapping enough to get better single target out of this, I guess you would use slower proj here. And then multiple totem support. That ends the 5 link. And then the 6 link, you would basically put this just into POB, and whatever, it said was like your highest DPS, probably going to be crit multi, I assume. You'd toss it in there for the 6 link. But that's the 5 link. And something I wanted to talk about is corrupting things in this league. So, as you guys probably realized, totems got really popular, especially Forbidden Rite totems. And it made the price of 6 link Soul Mantle kind of jump up, which is why I'm making this budget video, right? Of basically like using budget gear on it. Viridi's Veil went through the roof. Soul Mantle went through the roof. And the price of Soul Mantle kind of stood at 6-7 exalts for a long time, and now it's kind of just recently fallen, so it's more affordable now. But it was, I get that for a lot of people playing casually, it's probably not super affordable early on in the league. Now, luckily, Forbidden Rite is a very interesting skill in that if we mouse over it here, you can see it has the AoE tag and the projectile tag, which is insane. It also has Chaos tag, but I don't think there's plus to level of Chaos skills to chest. What this means is that if you have a 5 link and you can't afford to like do the next logical step of upgrading to a 6 link in terms of damage, something that's very efficient to do is you basically get 5 links, and you can do that from using Jeweler's Orbs yourself on them, and then trying to link them to try and get the 6 link yourself. And then basically when you hit a 5 link, instead of selling it immediately, what you do is you get the colors you want, which isn't really that hard, to be honest. It's probably like 50 chromes. And then you go to a temple, which is a lot easier to get the Temple Corrupt nowadays due to the these Nojin Glenage Karns. You definitely want to take these. They're really good. So you try and get a Corruption Temple, and you just YOLO it in there, because this is like 25C. It, like 3-4 days into the league, it's probably already down to like 25C, a 5-link Soul Mantle, maybe a bit more than that. So you slam it, and try and hit something good. I got +1 to socket level of gems. It's, it's a decent amount of damage. But you can get so much better than that. You can actually get a +4 to this skill, because you can get +2 to projectile gems and +2 to AoE gems, which is absolutely insane. +4 gem levels. I know we were talking about gem levels aren't the end-all be-all with the skill, but +4 gem levels is insane from a chest, right? So definitely corrupt these 5 links liberally, I would say, because the odds that you're going to hit something are high, because there's +1, there's just % damage, then there's +2 to projectiles, then there's +2 to AoE, and you can make use of all of it. So it's really good to just kind of like YOLO corrupt these Soul Mantles if this is your build, in my opinion. Super, super strong. Way to get a bit of extra damage without paying the cost of a 6-link. So I would highly recommend that. And I think the last thing we're going to go over is the skills. So like I said, I have the Chaos Golem for the damage reduction, a bit more Fizz damage reduction, because I feel like I didn't need the extra regen, or the extra damage from the other stuff wasn't going to be super significant. Using the Skitterbots for the 15% more shock. The way I see it is it's basically like a... you're basically kind of getting like a Zealotry for, less mana. So it's nice, and we want to have our mana unreserved with this build for MOM, obviously, right? And it allows us to use Hypothermia. So super good synergy with the Skitterbots. Highly recommend Skitterbots. Not to mention their Q, right? Using Despair with, let's see here. This is the Wither setup. I'll get to that in a second. Okay. Steel Skin is just like, I didn't have it on correctly, but it's just like a cast while move Steel Skin setup. Arcane Surge, Second Wind on the Flame Dash. Obviously, if you use a shield with +1 totem, you're going to have a shield charge in here. Definitely not a bad thing to do if you feel the build's not tanky enough for you. Or if you just get like a really strong shield, it'll actually be more damage. Despair with AoE and increased duration. Pretty good AoE on that. Makes it really easy to hit bosses, hit large groups of mobs if you need to. If you need the extra damage. And then the Wither setup, we have faster casting, Spell Echo, Wither, and increased area of effect. I think it's highly effective. In my opinion, there's people who are like, oh, have 2 Wither totems, get 6 totems, have 2 Wither totems, have 4 Dark Pact totems. Completely not necessary, especially with like just how easy it is to stack up Wither on a boss. I think the one thing I'm actually missing here is I should have increased duration on this. I don't know why, instead of increased area of effect, most likely. But yeah, other than that, especially with increased duration, super easy to keep the Wither stacks up, and things die so fast anyways. I definitely don't think it's worth sacrificing 2 whole totems for just applying Wither stacks, in my opinion. Especially because you can use Spell Echo on here, and it makes you apply them faster, and you don't really run into the normal problem with Spell Echo of your character feeling super animation locked. Like, you can pretty seamlessly transition from moving, right? It's really not that big of a deal at all. So I don't recommend using the totems to get your stacks at all. I think that's something where people think it's good. They think it's a bit like, oh, they're trying to get too cute with it. It's just not really that good in practice. So that's basically the build. POB will be in the description. Any questions or anything like that, feel free to leave them down there. I think this was pretty thorough, though, but obviously I can understand there's a lot of information. People are going to have questions. Yeah, and I'm going to be coming back to you guys with a much more tankier version of this build. Probably a couple different versions of this build in this league, but right now I'm taking a bit of a break from doing Forbidden Rite and messing around with some other things. Yeah, so Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time. See ya.